is Marquel Mohammed. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. Actually, I was born in Akron, Ohio. I moved to Columbus, Ohio when I was in the second grade. I was actually adopted when I was young, maybe 3 days out the hospital. Well, actually 3 months. 3 months out the hospital, I was adopted, and my adopted parents were living in Canton, Ohio, and they got divorced when I was maybe 2 or 3 years old. So I stayed in Canton a few more years, and then my mother, she moved to Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio was very, very growing with a lot of opportunities financially at the time, and Canton was a really depressed financial city. So she moved me to Columbus, Ohio, and that's where actually that's where I grew up at. My mother was a Baptist Christian. She grew up in a Baptist Christian family. My grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, great-grandfather, they were always going to church. So my mother, being a Christian, she actually, and it was funny that you asked, because she put me into Catholic school in my early years, second grade to 8th grade. And of course, I never grasped it. I naturally never believed in the concept of man being God. Of course, I believed Jesus was a righteous man and a prophet as a little boy, but I didn't believe in the concept of man being God. So that was something that I completely rejected. And due to the fact that I had other members in my family, other adults in my family who were Christian, but were far from living a Christian lifestyle, I kind of rejected and repulsed from Christianity. So I was never really a Christian. Although I went to Catholic school, I was never a Christian. Actually, what happened is Columbus, Ohio is a very, very rough city. It can be a rough city. And I grew up, I had a very hard background. I had a lot of stuff going on at home, a lot of family problems going on at home. So I was young, I was angry. And so I actually got expelled from Catholic school when I was in 8th grade. And that's when I went to public school. I went from a suburban white Catholic school to a urban ghetto public school. And that's where I went to, I finished middle school at Johnson Park Middle School. And I was involved. Life started just spiraling out of control at that young age. I was very, very wild and uncontrollable. I started dibbling and dabbling with gangs around that time. When I left there, I went to high school, and I was expelled. I was expelled from high school in the 9th grade. Then I went to go back to live with my father. My mother couldn't control me whatsoever at all. I was just uncontrollable. I went to live with my dad in Canton, Ohio. I got caught up in a robbery, and I ended up going to jail, a juvenile. And when I was locked up in the summertime, when I was released in the summertime, my dad threw his hands up like, I can't deal with my son. My son is a little too wild. So he sent me back to my mother, and I went back to Columbus. And then I went back to school in Columbus, and I went out there and I got a GED. I dropped out of school. I was so immersed in gang life and so immersed in the street life, I really couldn't focus on my education. I wasn't even thinking about it. So I went and got a GED in the 10th grade. I took my classes, and I went and took my GED, and I left school after the 10th grade. I didn't pursue any college or university. At the time, life was just spiraling out of control. I was young. I was staying out 2-3 nights a week. I had a car then. I was 16 years old. I had my own car, but I was just running the streets. We was involved in whether it was gang violence, whether it was robberies, selling drugs. I was just doing everything I could. I grew up very, very lost without any kind of guidance whatsoever at all. I was very, very angered. And the African Americans were very, very socially depressed in Columbus. And there was a lot. And at that time, in the early 1990s, was the crack boom, when crack cocaine had just really been introduced into of the black neighborhoods, and all throughout America, just violence just escalated and just exploded everywhere. And particularly in Ohio, the famous Freeway Ricky Ross, not the rapper, the real Rick Ross. He was the CIA, he was the quote-unquote drug cocaine kingpin of America. He had left and was running from the CIA and running from law enforcement from Los Angeles, and he came to Ohio. He came to Cincinnati, and he brought all of the LA Bloods with them. And it was really, really interesting because he brought the Bloods there. Many of the Crips who were doing business came there to Cincinnati, and then from Cincinnati it's only 90 minutes to Columbus. And then both the Crips and the Bloods came to Columbus. So be it that Chicago gangs already were folks, and the Vice Lords and the El Rukns were traditional Chicago gangs. They were already well established in Ohio. And then with this Crips and Bloods bringing the West Coast philosophy of gang violence and that West Coast culture, it made it a real wild society in Ohio. So you had this weird hybrid mixture of gangs. You had all this cocaine and crack in the streets. You had a whole lot of money. You had a whole lot of different territories, and you had a whole lot of violence. And that's pretty much what I grew up around. That's pretty much what I grew up around. Because I knew clearly, I believed in God. And I believed in my Creator. But I knew that Christianity was far from the answers. What I was looking for were answers for my own personal problems and the issues affecting the society. I saw the society just completely imploding around me. Christianity offers no answers whatsoever at all. I knew this. It was something deeply that I believed in. It was something that I came to believe in and to experience. But the problem with many youth that you'll find, whether they're in the United States, whether they're in the UK, throughout the West, you'll find they believe in God, but the path of truth isn't presented to them. So therefore they appear lost. Many of the youth believe in God, but clearly the path isn't propagated before them. So we're lost. Many of us were lost, and I was completely lost. I was almost hopeless. I used to pray to God. I didn't pray to Jesus. I would just say, God, I believed in one God. I didn't believe in him being a man, but I didn't know God. I didn't know Allah as I know him now. And I used to pray. I was 17 years old, and I had this young girl pregnant with my daughter Leslie. I had her, she was 18 years old when I had just turned 18 years old when I had a daughter. And that's when things began to change for me. I'm here with this beautiful little girl. I remember, because I was there when my daughter was born. She came out, handed her to me. And what happened was the mother had issues going on with her family. And my daughter came to live with me and my mom. I was living with my mom at the time. So I had this beautiful little girl. I was 18 years old. But my problem was like, look, I have no formal education. I have a GED. I don't have any college. I don't have any work history because I was in the streets selling drugs, or I was stealing, or I was robbing. So I was into quick money, getting quick money. I wasn't thinking about, and back then minimum wage was $5.25. I wasn't even thinking about that. And just like the philosophy of any young man, we want quick money. A rich man's hell is more attractive than a poor man's heaven. So I wasn't thinking about trying to get a 9-to-5 whatsoever at all. That wasn't even on the question. But I knew I had to change my life. I was involved with amateur boxing, and this is what really helped me, is that I was involved with amateur boxing when I was young. I started amateur boxing when I was 13 or 14 years old. So even though I was still running the streets and going wild and dealing with the women and partying and doing everything, I would still go to the gym and train. I would still go to have fights. So when my daughter came, I said, I'm going to dedicate myself to my boxing career. I'm going to go back to boxing and dedicate myself, spend more time in the gym. But at the same time, I had bad habits. I was still in the streets. And then what happened was I started saying to myself, I'm a father. I need to change my life. I need to find a way. Oh, God, please just show me a way. Just show me a way. And then things began to happen, just mysteriously happen. what happened was I was saying, you know, I need to find a way out of here. I said, you know what? I want to stop like the stealing and the robbing. I don't want to do that. You know what? I don't want to sell drugs. I started feeling like, you know what? I don't want to sell drugs to make money, because what happened was we had a few friends. We would go to a street corner called Oak and Wilson. It was a corner of Oak and Wilson in Columbus, Ohio, the notorious Oak and Wilson. And we would post up on each side. There would be a four-sided corner. And we would each get on a side, and we would work, and we would serve our drugs all night. We would go at nighttime. You know, same as the Muslims would come and pray for Salat al-Maghrib, we would hit the streets at when sunset. And what happened was one night, I said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I really don't want to do this. I don't think I'm going out tonight. And so I stayed in that night, and I went to sleep. You know, I slept and, you know, played with my daughter. And when I got up, I drove by there the next morning. And when I drove out there, you know, because you go back by the hood and you see, you know, you want to see what's going on, like what I missed last night. And when I came by Oak and Wilson, I saw yellow tape on my particular corner. Like, what happened? What's going on? What happened out here? A young kid told me, he said, listen, what happened was there was a drive-by shooting on the corner, because I had a corner store I used to be right out in front of. Drive-by shooting. Somebody, you know, got into an argument. They came by and shot the whole corner up and killed this young boy out here. What time did they do that at? What? I was like, what? And it just happened to be one of the times that I usually would be out there at that time of night. So it dawned on me like, God's looking out for me, because that's my side of the corner. Of all the corners to be shot up, my corner was being shot up. And someone was killed on the same place that I sell drugs at every night. Yo, maybe I need to stop. I need to make a change. So then I said, okay. So then here was another dilemma. What am I going to do for money? Because I'm used to getting this quick money. You can make a few $100s a night, a few $100,000, $1,500, easy in a night. What was I going to do for money? I said, you know what? I'd rather be broke. I'm going to find me a better way. So I went to the boxing gym, and I kept on training, and I was getting ready for the Golden Gloves that year, and it was hot outside. I'll always remember this day. It was extremely hot, and when the weather breaks in Columbus on Livingston Avenue, we had a gym on Livingston Avenue. That's when it's like a block party. Cars are going everywhere. People are all outside, and 3 men from the Nation of Islam, they were under Minister Farrakhan. They were walking out, handing out Final Call newspapers and talking. And, you know, I'm standing out at the gym, and I'm like, gosh, these guys are the freshest brothers I've ever seen. They were very, very well-dressed, skin spotless. They were crisp. And one of them named Derek Mohammed, may Allah bless his soul. He came to me and was like, yeah, I know that you a sweet little man. I know you can box and boom, 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 boom. Why don't you come out and see us? Why don't you come out and see us? We're over here on Main Street. Come over here and see us, and boom, 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 boom. And I was so taken back by their appearance, because I've never seen men so disciplined and so clean and so beautiful and vibrant. So I said, maybe I'm going to go by there. I'm already looking to change my life. So I went by there, and then when I got outside, I was like, no, I can't do this. I'm scared. And I left. And then I kept coming back, and I kept coming back. I came back 2 or 3 times, and I'd come to the door, and I'd be like, no, I'd walk away, and I left. And then I would read their newspapers. And then one day I said, you know what? I'm going to go in there. I'm actually going to see. I said, I'm looking for God. They're called the Nation of Islam. They're not Christian. Let me see what they got to offer. So I went in. And the man who was teaching was Minister Marquel Mohammed. And the picture that it gave me, because they had these red curtains. And it's red curtains. And he's a very tall, light-skinned man with a very, very strong demeanor, powerful voice. He was really captivating. And what he spoke about were dealing with social issues, how to revive America, how to revive youth through social revolution, through a moral revolution. And I was like, wow. I was amazed at some of the things that he talked about, how he talked about the oppression of African Americans and the poor and the weak in society. That stood out and gripped me. Oppression and change. And he talked about change. And so I said, I need to take a look at this. So then I kept coming back and I kept coming back. And eventually I joined the Nation of Islam. I was young, I was 18, 19 years old, had a second baby on the way coming. So I joined the Nation of Islam. And it was really interesting because when I joined the Nation of Islam, it was maybe a year before the Malcolm X movie actually came out, Spike Lee's Malcolm X movie. And people were talking about Malcolm X, and you know, we were at the Muhammad's Mosque 43, and people were talking about Malcolm X. Yeah, and he became Sunni, you know, and he left. He's this, and he became a hypocrite. Boom, 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 boom. And I'm like, what's Sunni Islam, and what's that about? That's strange. So what happened was that day I went to the library, and I grabbed a book of hadith from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I began reading about the Prophet Muhammad. I'm like, wow, Malcolm X got with this. This is what his split with the Nation of Islam was about. So I began to study and read a few books on the Prophet Muhammad. And then the Malcolm X movie came out, and then I saw and how Malcolm X converted to Islam, and I was like, whoa, this is what Islam is, huh? So then it was not too long after that, I was in a place called the flea market. And it was when they were in the flea market where, you know, where a bunch of people, we have like, there's a bunch of vendors, they set up shop there. There was a Dawah center. There's a brother named Bayan from the Islamic Center in Columbus, Ohio. He had a place where you can come and just get books. He just had pamphlets and books and tapes. And there was a young man there named Muhammad Abdullahi. And it was funny because I met him in Columbus, but I later on linked up with life with him in Atlanta, as you'll see in a little bit. And I sat down with him and I asked him questions. I said, yo, this is what the Nation of Islam believes about Allah. We believe this, and so. And he opened the Holy Quran and he explained to me, this is what Allah says about this. This is what Allah says about himself. I said, well, this is what the Nation of Islam says about the Prophet Muhammad. He said, this is what the Prophet said about himself. And we started talking about the Prophet. And I was amazed. I was really, really interested. And then I came back the next week when it was open. And the brother Bayan, he gave me some tapes of Imam Siraj Wahaj and Hamza Yusuf. And I listened to Hamza Yusuf and was captivated all over again. The first time I heard Minister Donnell Muhammad, the Nation of Islam, I was like, yo, I've never heard truth and fighting oppression and fighting against evil and moral revolution. So when I heard Imam Siraj Wahaj first time, I was captivated all over again. I said, this is good. I didn't feel at home yet, but I said, yo, this is good. And you know what? I think I need to be Muslim proper. I need to learn more about this Muhammad. So I got back with Muhammad Abdullahi and one of his friends, and me and him studied. Me and Muhammad Abdullahi and a man named Talib Abdul Shaheed, may Allah be pleased with them. And we studied with them. And they were inspired by a man named Sheikh Muhammad Sharif. And what Sheikh Muhammad Sharif, he studied in Sudan and used to translate the works of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio. And he published a lot of African Islamic works. They followed the Maliki school and the Sufi Tariqa. So when I took my Kalima Shahada and I began to study with them, and they brought me to a Jamaat with a man named Sheikh Amin Abdul Rashid. And we studied Maliki fiqh and we studied Tasawwuf. You know, they were also Sufis. But what happened was they had a disagreement amongst themselves and their Jamaat split. And Muhammad Abdullahi went to Atlanta, Talib went somewhere else, and Sheikh Amin, I stayed with Sheikh Amin. And this was my first exposure to the Ahlul Bayt, because Sheikh Amin's teacher was a descendant of Imam Hassan named Sharif Hadrami al-Haidara from Mauritania. He comes from a long line of Sharifs, of Saids there from Imam Hassan's lineage. And Sharif Hadrami was a Sunni scholar who was a Maliki alim, memorized all of Sahih Bukhari. He was an alim. So I began to meet him. And when I met him, I said, wow, the descendants of the Prophet. That was the hook that caught me. He's the descendant of the Prophet. And he was a scholar. He was the most knowledgeable man that I've ever met. So I began studying with them. And then later on in my studies, I continued studying Maliki fiqh, and then I met some men who were with Tariqa Tijani, and I began studying, and I took the Tariqa Tijani with Sheikh Hassan Sisi, and I studied with them, and and when I became Tijani, I began studying with a lot of descendants of Imam Hassan who were Sunni and were Tijani, Sharif Jabril, and there were a lot of different sheikhs. They would come into Columbus, and I would sit with them and study with them, and the whole thing was running to the sheikhs of the Ahlul Bayt, and getting the barak of the descendants of the Prophet. So I would study with them, and there was one particular sheikh, Sharif Muhammad Lamin. He was from Senegal. He was Hafiz of Quran, also an alim, but he was a descendant of Imam Hussein, Sunni. And I studied with him, and he took me into his house, and that was my first real exposure to the Ahlul Bayt as I understood it then. I studied with him, I stayed at his house, and when he would come to Columbus, I would stay with him. We became very, very almost inseparable. And he sparked my interest because he would say things like, my grandfather, Imam Jafar Sadiq. It's like, who's Jafar Sadiq? Who is that? What's that about? So he sparked my interest, and then I began to read little books, and I would read all the Sunni works I could find, because the Sunni works were about Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam were very, very scarce. You have mention of him, small little quotes here, small little quote there, nothing serious about his life, but there were, and I would read, I said, okay. So I would begin studying a little bit more about Imam Jafar Sadiq, and I'd be like, Imam Hassan, let me read about a little bit about Imam Hassan. And it was very, very, in Sunni communities, the great tragedy of Sunni Islam is that there's no mention whatsoever of Imam Hussein or his life. So the works were very, very scarce, but I was familiar a little bit about him. So I would continue studying about the Ahlul Bayt, and I would continue studying, and as I got older, the more I would read a little bit about the Ahlul Bayt here, more here. And one of my teachers in the Tariqah became Shia, and he came to me and started talking to me about Shiism, but everybody in the Tariqah, everyone around him kind of pushed him to the side and isolated him, so I didn't give him any attention. This was 15 years ago, and I didn't give him any attention whatsoever at all. I didn't pay any attention to him, but he would talk to me a little bit about Shiism, okay, and I would learn. So then what happened was my interest started continuing to grow, studying with Sharif Muhammad Lamin. And then I met this beautiful woman in Atlanta, and another life-changing moment. I met this beautiful woman in Atlanta, and I went out there, I went to Atlanta and married her. And Muhammad Abdullah, who originally introduced me to Islam, was there. So I would go down there and I would study with them. I would do the dhikr with the Tijanis. I continued my Maliki fiqh studies. And then I met with a brother who I happened to know from Columbus, Ohio. He's an expert in Arabic. He went and got a degree, a bachelor's degree in Arabic at Ohio State University. He was translating works. And he came to me one day, his name was Muhammad Mendez, and he said, I'm studying with the descendant of Imam Hussein, named Sheikh Muhammad Ninwi, the wisest, the deepest scholar I've ever met. You need to go study with him. You need to go and see him. I said, sure, he's a descendant of Imam Hussein? Okay, no problem. So when I met Sheikh Ninwi, I went to his dars, and that was another life-changing moment because he was captivating. Sheikh Ninwi, although he's considered Sunni, he talks about Imam Hussein. He talks about the events of Karbala. He talked about Zayd ibn Ali, the son of Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. He would talk about the Ahlul Bayt, and I began to learn more, and I was captivated. But he also had positions that were clearly Shia. He didn't believe in the Ash'ari position of Al-Bayn and the Ash'ari position of destiny. He believed in the position of Al-Bayn al-Amr Amrayn. He didn't believe in the Sunni position that was common, that you could see Allah. He believed Allah could not be seen, which is also a position of the Ahlul Bayt. So as I met him, was captivated, said, oh, I got to study with Sheikh Ninwi, right? And at the time, I was teaching on a radio show called the Dean Over Dunya Show. There were 3 brothers from Philadelphia and me. We were all rotating in on the show. And I remember distinctly me starting to turn towards the Ahlul Bayt, because me and Muhammad Abdul Haq Mendez did a show on Dean Over Dunya show. It dealt with the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. And we talked about the oppression of the Ahlul Bayt. And he went first and did a piece on the Ahlul Bayt, and I did a piece on Imam Jafar Sadiq. We had callers calling in, asking questions about why was Imam Nasa'i killed? Well, Imam Nasa'i was killed because he wouldn't curse Imam Ali in the masjid. We were given these answers. So, so I started seeing myself going in a direction a little closer towards the Ahlul Bayt. Then what happened was, it was coming time for, it was the month of Muharram. And Muhammad came to me, he said, listen, Sheikh Akil and one of the other sheikhs at the City of Knowledge, the Shia Center, they invited us to come out, because they do a talk every night of the first 10 nights of Muharram. They're going to give a talk. They invited us to go, but I don't know if I'm going to go, because they're going to be cursing the Sahaba, and I don't know if I'm going to go on. I said, yeah, I'm going. What's the address? Let me hear about this first, not first exposure to their Shia, right? Ahlul Bayt. Let me go see what they're talking about. So I went in there, and one thing that immediately hit me about the Shia masjids and the Shia centers that was distinctly different than anything I've ever experienced is when I came in, it was the warmest place I've ever been to. Everyone came and gave me salams. The brothers, they came. I didn't come to them. They gave me salams. And they came and shook my hand and, who are you, brother? And how you doing? And boom, boom. And, I'm new because I've never been to the Shia Center. What's going on here? Because I've never been to none of the festivals about, for the 10th of Muharram. I've never knew what they did. So they came and they sat me with them and explained, we're gonna hear a little bit of poetry, and people are going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to have Sheikh Ali give a talk. I said, okay. So they made me really, really relaxed by how warm. The Shia centers were very, very warm. And so it caught my attention. You had different people coming and giving poetry. And one of the sheikh's little girls, she was maybe 9 years old. She got up, and I think she recited some of Surah Al-Mulk, did some poetry. And when she got done, she said, and oh Allah, I want you to send the reward to our master Imam Hussein. Caught my ears. I was like, what's this about? Giving the reward to Imam Hussein? And it was really interesting because she's a little girl, but yet they gave her space to get up and to give a presentation. And that caught my, because, in many of the Sunni masjids, it's a very misogynistic type culture. Women, you sit back there and don't be heard and don't be seen. But here you see the Shia sisters very much involved in the community, giving poetry and talking. And then Sheikh Ali got up and talked. And he gave a talk that night that was absolutely spectacular. He talked very, very passionately about the actual 10th of Muharram and about Imam Hussein's struggle. He talked about the bravery of those men that were with Imam Hussein. And the part that really caught me was about Fadl Abbas. How he had first arm was cut, second arm was cut. So then he put this bucket in his mouth and carried this bucket, not for himself, but for Imam Hussein, who hadn't had anything to drink. He went through the whole story this night. And when I heard that story, I said, I'm at home. This is what I've always searched for, but was incomplete. When I heard him talking about fighting oppression and fighting against tyranny, that's what originally, and justice, that's what originally brought me to the Nation of Islam. I was searching for something. And this is what brought me to the Nation of Islam. So when I heard Minister Donnell Muhammad talk about social justice and fighting oppression and tyranny, but I understood that this is where I was really searching for. When I went to Sunni Islam, I was searching for religion. I was searching for the Prophet Muhammad. I was searching for his religious guidance. I was searching for his piety. But I finally found that mark. I was a Sufi all these years and have studied Tasawwuf, trying to perfect my akhlaq. But when I heard about the character of Imam Hussein, that was the most perfect akhlaq, the most perfect of all the awliya. There was nothing more perfect than Imam Hussein in my eyes. When I heard that, I knew I was at home. And I knew that night, I said, this is home. Karbala is home. Those martyrs are my brothers. I need to follow them. Hussein, that's my master. I need to become Shia. I knew that night. So, and it was an interesting moment because I said, yeah, I'm gonna become Shia, no doubt. And so I went home, and my wife was like, hey baby, how did the talk go? I was like, it was okay, it was good. And I just left it alone. Because then reality hit, like, how am I going to tell my wife and how am I going to tell my friends? And I've heard all this negative propaganda about Shia and this anti-Shia sentiment from all these people. How am I going to tell them? So I said, I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to go meet with one of the sheikhs. So one of the sheikhs at the center I went to, he took me out to dinner. He sat me down. He talked to me and explained to me about the imamate of Imam Ali, how Imam Ali was the choice of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi, and he talked to me about Shiism, and I felt a little more comfortable. And so then I came home and said, you know, I talked to my wife and was like, okay, baby, I need you to sit down. You know, I went to the Shia Center and boom, 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 boom. And I explained to her about Imam Hussein, and I think I'm going to become Shia. You know, I told my wife, just like when Rasulullah came back from Mount Hira, he told Khadijah, because that was the only supporter that he had. I came home to my wife like Rasulullah did to Khadijah, and she was like, okay, alhamdulillah, let me learn about this. Okay, alhamdulillah. So I began studying with the brothers in Atlanta, and they took me to the Atlanta at the time had a nice house ran by Dr. Nawab and Maulana Fauzi. Two very, very scholarly brothers. They had a little house. They had a house in the City of Knowledge in Atlanta, and I began studying with them, and it was amazing because I just started just gobbling up the knowledge, eating up the knowledge. I all the books I could get, all the questions I had, I began to ask them and study with them, but things began to happen. I had to stop doing the Deen Over Dunya show because I began saying certain things and people was like, yo, what's wrong with that brother? Is that brother Shia? Is that brother Shia now? What's the problem with that? So eventually me and them began to fall out, so I stopped doing the radio show. People were reading my Facebook post, and, you know, some of my friends and some of my old teachers actually defriended me. And one of my teachers, he said, you know, I had to defriend you from Facebook, man, because you're talking about that Shia stuff. I didn't say anything. So it started becoming like some of my old friends were defriending me. I was losing other friends. People were talking about me. And, you know, ultimately my marriage started to suffer. All other things were happening, but my marriage, me and my wife were having problems. And eventually, unfortunately, we had divorced. And so then I said, well, I'm going to go back to Ohio and I'm going to start over. So I went back to Ohio, and I was the only Shia in the city. And the imam there, still thinking I was Sunni, he said, yeah, we want you to go in, we want you to give a Jummah khutbah and reorientate yourself in the community. I went and gave a khutbah. I talked about the superiority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi over the other prophets and some of his miracles. And there was a particular brother who kind of gravitated towards me. And the imam was like, yeah, you go study with him. Go study with him. Markel's great to study with. So I used to take him to do the same way that Sheikh Akil took me and turned me on to the imamate of the Ahlul Bayt, the choice of Imam Ali being superior to all of the Sahaba. I turned this brother on the same way. Next thing you know, he became Shia. Next thing you know, he went to his brother. His brother became Shia. His father became Shia. Some of his friends became Shia. So we started working together. And then I said, okay, well, I got these brothers established here. I went to Providence, Rhode Island. I moved to Providence and married a woman in Providence. She became Shia. And so I was living in Providence for a while. And then something amazing happened. Me and my ex-wife that I first became Shia with, we had just started talking again. We had divorced, and she had realized, dealing with all these other brothers, the levels of akhlaq and some of the understanding that these brothers lacked. They were deficient. So she would come back to me and ask me questions, because no one has wisdom, understanding, akhlaq, and guidance like the Ahlul Bayt. You can't go what the Shia of the Ahlul Bayt have. You can't go and get that nowhere else. You can have a Sunni alim who studied at Azhar, Qawain, Riyadh, but they don't have what the Ahlul Bayt have, period. So she would come back and talk to me. And so eventually we remarried. We turned around and we actually remarried this past May. We remarried. Of course, she became Shia as well. And I came down here to Orlando because I knew that they had the Imam Ali Seminary. And I put my application in January. Then I had got the word. It seemed like everything fell into place. Like I was getting ready to remarry the sister. In April, I got word from Sheikh Ali, like, we accepted you to the Imam Ali Seminary. It's a 2-year program. We want you to come down for it. It's going to be starting in September. Boom. I ended up remarrying my wife, who had just happened to live in Orlando. She had moved from Atlanta to Orlando, right? The house is here. So, I mean, it's how Allah just put it together for me. So I came down here. And so we remarried. She became Shia, of course. She took the Ahlul Bayt, or has taken the Ahlul Bayt, and is turning other sisters on to the Ahlul Bayt herself. And, you know, I'm here at the Imam Ali Seminary, studying with Maulana Bey and Sheikh Ali, and it's wonderful. Right, well, what we're going to do here is, because this house is really a setup for, or a preparation for study elsewhere, to go to Iraq, to Najaf, or to go to Qum. Actually, it was a 2-year program, but we were informed this year they upped it to a 3-year program. What my plans, inshallah, are to do my 2 years here. I already started in the second, because I'd already worked well with Arabic. I'm already in the 2nd year Arabic class. I skipped the 1st year Arabic class. So I'm going to work to get my Arabic very, very crisp and polished. Continue to learn the aqaid, continue to learn the fiqh of the Ahlul Bayt. And inshallah, I'm going to go to Najaf or Qum after I graduate from here. That's the plan. In the process, me and another student are working on books. I'm working on a book dealing with the Ahlul Bayt and purification of the soul, and I'm also working on a work dealing with the obligation of social justice, establishing social justice, because I've been very much inspired by Ayatollah Khomeini and his works, and based on some of his works, we're going to be writing, you know, so because what we need is, Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, you know, he said that Shiism is built on 4 pillars: Irfan, theology, science, and literature. We need books. The people of the West, we need books. We need literature. You know, we're in an age now where everything is being translated from English and Farsi and Urdu into English. So now we have a large level of books, but what we need is Western speakers who grew up in America, who grew up in the West, to begin writing books teaching Shiism as we understand it for the people of the West. So that's ultimately my project, inshallah, is to continue my learning and to write books as I'm learning, inshallah. ultimately, I mean, the ultimate role model for the Shia, the ultimate role model is Imam Hussein. He's the greatest of all of the Shuhada. He exemplified what it takes to establish justice in the world. Imam Hussein, by means of his character, his akhlaq, I mean, here's a man who was fighting at Karbala, but while arrows were being shot at him, while members of his family were fighting, killing and being killed, he still did not stop making salat. He made salat on time. That's the kind of character of a man, the kind of dedication that you're going to need. And he showed the price that's going to be paid, or the price that needs to be paid for freedom. And his courage and his willingness to stand up against injustice, to stand up against tyranny, which is right now the greatest thing, which is the theme of righteous people in the world. Because we're faced in the West with the greatest amount of tyranny history has ever seen. This is clearly this Western country that I live in. This is the Dajjal al-Kubra. This is it. We're faced with an onslaught of evil, culturally, socially, economically, educationally. In the educational system, there's evil. There's racism. This is a society that's glamorized murder, glamorized killing, glamorized rape, glamorized sex outside of marriage, glamorized oppression. This is a society that is producing, manufacturing Yazids by the thousands, by the millions. And there's a need for men to stand up, to take positions of Imam like Imam Hussein did, and to stand up against the injustice and tyranny of our politicians, of our government, and of just against ignorance itself, because the American people and the people of the West want better. They just don't know better. That's the job of the Shia, to introduce Imam Hussein to the people, to introduce his legacy to the people, to introduce his teaching to the people, and to introduce the teachings of his family. The fiqh, when we have legal problems with regards to Muslims, the problems that affect us, especially in the West, we're extremely divided. It is a very, very extremely evil and sectarian type nature of the Islamic culture. When we have problems or disagreements, we can go to the fiqh of the Ahlul Bayt to solve our differences. When we have differences on Aqidah, can Allah be seen? Can Allah not be seen? Is this permissible to say about Allah? Is this permissible to say about Allah? No, is this permissible to say about the prophets? Is this permissible? Did the prophets sin? Were all the prophets infallible? No, they weren't infallible. See, Adam sinned because he ate from the tree, and Yunus ran from Allah, from Allah's command. No, Allah. See, when we see all these theological differences, we know that the teaching of the Ahlul Bayt clarified all this. There's no controversy. And the arguments of the Ahlul Bayt are becoming so clear in these times. They're so clear, crystal clear. All that's really needed for the people. The people want the message of Imam Hussein. It's for those of us who accept the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt and accept them as our masters to learn this religion and to just go out there and propagate it, because the people want this. America needs this. The West needs Shia.